get going. So good evening, everybody. My name is Angel Gallinall, and I want to welcome you to our presentation tonight for the Harvard Business School Club of South Florida. As you know, those of you who are members of the club already, the HBS Club of South Florida is the club for the alumni of Harvard Business School in the area, in the Tri-County area. We're excited for the presentation tonight. This is another one in the series of programs that we have been putting on since the COVID-19 situation. So we've gone to virtual programming. We're so glad that so many of you have signed up. I think this is going to be probably one of the biggest turnouts that we've had so far. I want to encourage those of you who are members to continue to pay attention and be on the lookout for information from us on the club for all our programming, as we will probably continue in a virtual format for the next several months. So we will look to have some additional programming that is of high quality and that brings value to you and your membership. Those of you who are attending who are HBS alums but are not members, encourage you to join the club. You can find details on our website, www.hbssouthflorida.org. And for those of you who are here as guests, thank you for joining us. We strive to make most of our programs available to a broader community beyond the HBS community, obviously at a reduced charge, but we always welcome friends of the HBS community down here. So the ground rules are that this will be a webinar, so we will not have video capability tonight for you, but you will be able to pose Q&A in the Q&A. So for those of you who are highly familiar with Zoom, look for the Q&A button and click that and submit your questions throughout the presentation. And we're going to try to answer as many of them as we can over the course of the period of time that we're together. The video or the session is being recorded. It will be made available later on our website. And the ground rules beyond that are obviously just be mindful and courteous and look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our friends from Reform Elections Now. These gentlemen from Reform Elections Now contacted us several weeks ago, and we have been talking to them over several months now, really, actually. And we're excited by what they have to discuss with us tonight. I've had a chance to see a couple of their presentations. I actually was on a presentation last night that they made, and I think you'll be excited with the presentation. So one of the gentlemen who is in charge of Reform Elections Now is named Mike Otten, and I am going to pass the baton on to Mike. So Mike, away to you, and he'll take us to the next speaker from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel, and I want to explain a little bit about what Reform Elections Now is. It was formed almost 3 years ago at a Harvard Business School alumni luncheon, which was organized to review a thesis by Catherine Gale and Harvard professor Michael Porter. And the thesis was that the current politics industry is an anti-competitive duopoly with negative effects and impacts on American business competitiveness. They identified the election processes as a major part of the problem and disincented constructive government action. They suggested, and we agreed, that election reform can be a major factor in making our government work better for the people rather than just the political parties. Our team has been working since then, that's almost 3 years ago, to understand and educate ourselves and others how to include constructive engagement as part of our civic responsibilities. Our organization is nonpartisan. It's made up of Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and has never included the word donate in our communications, which I think differentiates us from an awful lot of the email we're all getting. We appreciate the opportunity to share this afternoon some of our findings with colleagues from the Harvard Clubs of Southern Florida, but we would even more welcome your subsequent involvement, as we believe there are needs for systemic change that require thoughtful action beyond 2020. The worst outcome of this year's election could be to forget the risks and do nothing to mitigate them for future generations. We have looked at pros and cons of various proposed reforms and published relevant white papers on our website. And I think we'll show I think it shows already on the screen. It's reformelectionsnow.org. Successful election innovations are most likely to be achieved at the state level. There are major reforms proposed this year in Maine, Massachusetts, Alaska, and Florida. Floridians should seriously examine Amendment number 3 on your November ballot, which tries to address the problem that the current closed primary system in Florida excludes approximately 3.6 million independents from meaningful participation in the primaries. You can learn more about this initiative at their website. It's called All Voters Vote. We'd like to take a poll now as to your views about the year's election risks, which we have been seeing a lot more attention in the newspapers lately, although we've been talking about it for 3 months. Please take a minute to select what you think are the 2 biggest risks for the 2020 election. We shall then take a similar poll towards the end of the meeting to see if your views change. Angel's put the poll up. Please go ahead and start voting.
We'll give it about 30 seconds total, Mike.
Well, let's see how the votes are beginning to come in now. I think it'll probably be about 30 seconds. Angel can see how many have come in and versus the total number of people on the call.
All right, I think we've got about 80%, so we'll give it a couple more seconds for people to get their last. And if you can't see all the choices, please just scroll down. You should be able to, but just in case. So, all right, we're going to cut it off then. We've got more than 85%, and we're going to show you the results.
50% are in fact focused on the mail-in ballots.
Oh, are we sharing the? Oh, you're sharing the poll. That's great.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So that gives us a good transition then.
During the presentation, Angel and Herb Kaplan will be monitoring the chat window, where we would like for you to raise questions or concerns for discussion, which we would like to have all of us involved with after the presentation by Peter Cyrus. Peter hates long introductions, but our election reform team acknowledges and very much appreciates the intellectual depth along with research and communication skills that he has brought to a truly complex subject. I now turn the meeting over to Peter.
Thanks, Mike. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Okay, great. I want to thank all the people, needless to say, I got a crank call. I want to thank all the people from Harvard for coming to this presentation. And I also want to give a shout out to my favorite lawyer in the world, John Sundberg from Bills and Sundberg, who's from Miami. Even though he's a Yale graduate, John, I appreciate your coming to our presentation. And those of you who know John, don't hold it against him that he went to Yale. So our discussion today is going to be how to avoid a black swan election in 2020. Now, black swan is an unpredictable and often catastrophic event that falls outside the boundaries of normal prediction, but that in retrospect can often be understood. We don't believe that a black swan will occur in 2020, but we do believe that such an event is possible given the potential problems with polarization and mail-in voting. And so in this presentation, we'll consider how events could create a potential black swan events and steps that could be taken now to avoid such events from occurring. Okay, so on election day, Donald Trump holds an 8-point lead in the popular vote. He leads in states with 480 electoral votes. And according to the Exit polls, 81% of Trump voters voted in person versus 31% of Biden voters. And Trump declares his victory from the 18th hole at Mar-a-Lago. So now the blue wave starts, and by the 5th of November, Trump's lead shrinks to 3%. Trump tweets, mail-in votes are frauds, must go with election night. And I will tell you, all the quotes here are actual quotes. We didn't make up any quotes from anybody. There's no fake news in this presentation. As mail-in counting continues, Biden takes a 1-point lead, and Trump says the results of the November 3 vote will not be known for years. I'm not a good loser. I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election. By the 17th, states continue counting mail-in votes, and Biden pulls ahead by 4 points in the popular vote. Trump continues to tweet. Now, in New York, as an example, less than 25% of mail-in votes have been counted. Rejection rates are over 20%, and lawsuits are brought by both parties. The slow counting and rejection rates plague states. Millions of ballots are left to count, and some states that started early, Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida in particular, still have a few elections too close to call. Lawsuits are filed over counting of mail-in ballots in 18 states, 11 Senate races, and 94 House elections. Now, as the mail-in continues, Biden's popular vote lead increases to 7%, and he leads in states with 318 electoral votes. And Trump says mail-in ballots, they cheat, mail-in ballots are dangerous for this country, they're fraudulent. But as you can see from, and these are hypothetical numbers, obviously, in the swing states, the margins are very narrow. Now, you may notice at the bottom of this chart, it says Maine number 2 and Nebraska number 2. That's because, unlike the other states, in Maine and Nebraska, some electoral votes are allocated by congressional districts. So, for example, each of the congressional districts in Maine and Nebraska gets its own electoral vote. December 8th is what we call Safe Harbor Day. On December 8th, states must attest that they have an official result. But the counting is still continuing. In 5 states, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Ohio, and Florida have begun official recounts. On December 14th, the state electoral colleges meet. Now, with the recounts and the lawsuits, delegations in a number of states are not yet able to verify the results, except this date is not maneuverable. This is a date set in the law. So on the 18th of December, the state legislatures meet. Now, states do not want to give up their electoral vote. So in accordance with something called the Electoral Count Act of 1887, state legislatures in each of the pending states meet and appoint electors. Now, although Biden has a lead in 6 of these 9 states, Republican legislatures in all of the states cast their votes supporting Trump. In the 2 districts I mentioned before, the Democrats in Maine cast their votes for Biden, the Republicans in Nebraska, number 2, cast their vote for Trump. Democratic governors in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania appoint a separate slate of electors supporting Biden. So now we have 2 slates of electors from Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Now, on the 21st of December, the Supreme Court refuses to rule on the legitimacy of the competing slates, claiming election rules have been determined by the 12th and 20th Amendment. Now, if you don't know the 12th Amendment, it was ratified in 1804 after the disputed election in 1800, where Alexander Hamilton, who was the star of the Broadway show, after the 35th ballot, switched his vote, which led to Jefferson's election and Burr's defeat, and ultimately to the duel where Burr killed Hamilton. Now, the reason I bring this up is because hopefully nobody will be killed in a duel over this election. Because if you could believe it, the U.S. Constitution does not have any clear rules for succession if a candidate dies before Congress has approved the vote of the Electoral College. So, it's fortunate no one has died yet, but this is a loophole that has to be corrected. So on the 23rd of December, votes are sent to Mike Pence. On the 3rd of January, the new Congress takes office. Now, at this time, Senate races in a whole bunch of states, and it says Georgia too, because there are 2 Senate races in Georgia, are still being challenged. So at this point in time, the Republicans have 42 seats and the Democrats have 46, with the others still in question. But there's the 17th Amendment says that governors can fill seats in the Senate on a temporary basis. So Republican governors fill the seats in their states with Republicans, the Democratic governors in Michigan, Maine, and Kentucky appoint Democrats. This still gives Republicans a 51-47 majority, although Mitch has been ditched. And so Democrats, needless to say, challenge the appointment of the Republican senators, but as I said, this is covered by the 17th Amendment. Now in the House, the Democrats retain control because unlike the Senate, vacancies in the House can only be filled by special elections, and 94 House seats are vacant. So Mike Pence on January 6th begins the count of electoral votes and announces that he has these 2 sets of votes from these 4 states. The 2 houses of Congress separate to consider the competing slates. The Republicans in the Senate approve the Trump slates, giving Donald Trump 294 votes. The Democrats in the House approve the Biden slates, giving Biden 305 votes. So both parties immediately rush to federal court to challenge the results. And the House of Representatives resolves to not invite the Senate back into its chambers for continuing the count until these issues have been resolved. So with a conflict between the House and the Senate, Mike Pence instructs the House to select a president according to the rules of the 12th Amendment. Now, the rules of the 12th Amendment state, if nobody has a majority, the House shall choose the president. Now, most of you are saying, well, then the Democrats control the House. Wrong. The Republicans, for this purpose, the Republicans control the House. Because what the law says is that each state is going to have 1 vote in the selection of the president. California and North Dakota, Florida and South Dakota, they all have 1 vote. And you need a quorum. So with each state needing 1 vote, Republicans are in the majority with 23 states compared to 22 for the Democrats. There's too many O's before 2. And 5 are either tied or because of legal challenges without representation. Now, right at this point in time, the Republicans have 26 states and the Democrats have 23 with 1 tied. So just so you don't think that this is, I'm inventing something, with the result of the election, the Republicans currently have more states than the Democrats in the Congress, even though the Democrats have a majority of seats in the House of Representatives. So the 23 states controlled by Republicans vote to elect Donald Trump as president. The 22 states and the 5 controlled by the Democrats and the 5 uncontested or even states abstain. So a majority of states have not voted, and as a result, no decision is reached. So we have our president, Nancy Pelosi. With neither candidate able to secure a majority of the Electoral College, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the 3rd in line for the presidency, declares she will serve as president until the election is resolved. Of course, in the afternoon, the Senate seats with the Republicans filling the disputed Senate seats, the Senate, under the rules of the Constitution, elects Mike Pence as vice president. And since no president has been chosen by the Electoral College, Mike Pence declares that he will serve as president until the election is finalized. So now we have two presidents. The Supreme Court again refuses to consider the results, claiming it's the responsibility of the legislative branch. Donald Trump says it's the greatest fraud in history. Biden says he trusts the American system of government. The news media is 24/7, as you would expect. Protests and riots break out. Russia invades the Baltics. China blockades Taiwan, and Turkey invades Cyprus. So with riots and protests erupting throughout the country, Russia invading the Baltics, China blockading Taiwan, and Turkey invading Cyprus, Donald Trump invokes the National Emergencies Act and the Insurrection Act of 1807 and deploys both the U.S. military and the National Guard. And Trump announces he will continue to serve as president until the national emergency is ended. On the 15th, Democrats call Trump a despot and a dictator. Trump calls the Democrats thugs and accuses Schumer and Pelosi of treason. Trump mobilizes the Army and the National Guard, and gun-wielding militias from both sides clog the streets. People remain barricaded inside their homes. Now, on January 16th, as vote counting continues, Joe Biden claims that he has won the votes of states with 304 electoral votes, and he claims the presidency, which Trump calls a pitiful fraud. So now we have 4 people claiming the presidency. On the 17th, with the stock market continuing to plunge and riots throughout the country, international crises, and 4 people claiming the presidency, a bipartisan group of senators and congresspersons meets to see if they can resolve the constitutional crisis under Section 3 of the 20th Amendment, which reads, Congress may provide for the case wherein neither president-elect nor vice president-elect shall have qualified, declaring who shall then serve as president, or the manner in which one who is to act shall be selected. So it's the 17th, the new president is inaugurated on the 20th. They got to find somebody to serve as president until the election can be resolved. So who's going to be able to step in 3 days to serve as president? They think it's easier to look at former presidents. They look at Carter, I forgot Carter here, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. Clinton is eliminated because Republicans viewed this is a backdoor way of installing Hillary. Obama is eliminated because Republicans consider him too polarized, but they picked George W. Bush. The Republicans are willing to accept Bush rather than Biden. The Democrats are certainly willing to accept Bush rather than Trump. And so as a compromise, they agree that Al Gore should be vice president. So after the hanging chads in Florida, we now have Bush and Gore together as a team. So on the 19th, the day before the inauguration, the Supreme Court meets to consider the challenges: Nancy Pelosi, Mike Pence, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, George W. Bush with Al Gore. Supreme Court listens to the arguments, and on January 11th at 11 a.m., 1 hour before inauguration, the Supreme Court hands down its decision. Okay, take your pick. You can have any of those people you want. They're all swearing in. Now, just to finish this story, on February 1st, 2021, we're going to have a poll here. Sorry. Okay, we're going to have a poll. I'll stop while we have a poll. Who do you think gets inaugurated on January 20th, 2021? The Electoral College winner, Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, the Bipartisan Compromise, Trump remains in office, or no guess?
give it a couple more
Yeah,
seconds.
no, I'm gonna give it plenty of time.
All right, 10 more seconds and then we'll close the polling. Going, gone, and the results are in.
and not very different from last night. It's interesting that 49% of the people who are voting, well, no guess is 9%, that the bipartisan compromise choice, Don, I mean, only 39% voting for the Electoral College winner. So that's pretty scary. Okay, can I keep going, Angel?
Yes.
Okay. So February 2021, the mail-in ballots are continuing. The Electoral College finally meets and ratifies the result of the 2020 election. Congress ratifies the results. And on April 20th, 2022, only a year and 3 months late, a new president is inaugurated. So the question is, how could this constitutional crisis have occurred? And how can we have a situation where you're going to vote for the winner of the Electoral College, not for somebody else? Okay. 3 factors contributed to this constitutional crisis: political polarization, which left both parties unwilling to compromise, COVID, and the switch to mail-in voting. As we said, Donald Trump is already signaling his 2020 strategy, saying, I'm not a good loser. I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election. And to cause further disruption, Trump told voters in North Carolina to vote twice, by mail and in person. Send your ballot in and then go to the polls and vote. Now, this is a brilliant concept if you want to disrupt an election, because even if one person who follows Trump's advice succeeds in voting twice because of some glitch in the system, this could open a litigation can of worms like nothing we've ever seen, and it could take months or years to review every ballot to ensure people haven't voted twice. But the problem with mail-in voting is infrastructure. Now, Democrats and nonpartisan experts have disputed Trump's assertion, pointing out that there's little evidence of mail-in fraud. They could be correct, but what they miss is some states do not have the infrastructure to handle vast increases in mail-in voting. Without this infrastructure, it could take months to count ballots. Many ballots could be rejected, resulting in legal challenges. As we said, if anybody gets away with voting twice, challenges will multiply, and that's going to delay the election. So let's take a second to look at the issues of mail-in voting. There are 4 steps to the ballot process: sending a ballot, securing it, processing it, and counting it. Logic says mail-in votes should be easy to secure, process, and count. They arrive early. When they arrive, people can inspect and process them. They can inform voters if there's a problem, and then begin counting. Unfortunately, in most states, state rules make securing, processing, and counting these ballots difficult, time-consuming, and rife with errors. Now, before I go on, I have bad news for everybody on the call. I know you're used to people from New York coming down and saying Florida is screwed up. Okay, I know, people are going to come with hanging chads and the close election in 2018. Unfortunately, Florida is actually doing things right, as you will see later in the presentation. So if you want to nag people, keep the phone numbers of your friends from New York and other states. Okay, so the first problem is that of the post office. Ballots can be lost, stolen, arrive late. The Postmaster General has announced the steps to reduce the deficit, which has led to some mail problems. As you see, in Florida, in the Fort Myers Distribution Center, the number of delayed pieces went from 186,000 in April to 5.7 million in August. And this is a post office number. This isn't my number. And the post office is sending the following letter to most states. Certain deadlines concerning mail-in ballots appear to be in Congress with the Postal Service's delivery standards. This mismatch creates a significant risk that some ballots will not be returned by mail in time to be counted under your laws as we understand them. So post office is telling you, hey, we got problems. Now, many states have extended the time for delivery. They're saying, you know, hey, we can, in California, the ballots can arrive 17 days after the election, as long as they're postmarked on time. 10 days, 14 days in Illinois, 14 days in Michigan. Well, this means these states, they're going to wait. Mind you, they only have 6 weeks until the Electoral College has to vote, and they're giving an extra 2 weeks for ballots to arrive. Now, postmarks are a problem. This is my favorite, okay? In many states like New York, the ballots were sent in postage-paid business reply envelopes. There's only one problem. The U.S. Post Office does not postmark these envelopes because they're postage-paid business reply. So this means, as what happened in New York, that tens of thousands of votes, of ballots that were sent on time were not counted because they didn't have postmarks. This would have been easy to fix, except the Postal Service and the government didn't really talk to each other. When I mean the government, I mean the state government. States that have all mail voting, like Colorado, Oregon, Washington, these states, they use drop boxes. So in these kind of states, 2/3 of voters drop their ballots at a polling place or in a drop box. That avoids all the problems with the mail. But most states don't have drop boxes or have very few. Now, the second problem is many states do not process ballots until election day. I'm talking about processing ballots, opening the ballots, seeing if there's a seal on the envelope, signatures must be checked. And 4 people need to be involved in this process. The person opening the ballot, the person marking the tally book, and 1 person from each party. This is time consuming. And if you don't open a ballot and process a ballot until election day, if somebody made a mistake, there's no way to correct it. Now, few states begin counting before election day, same issue. Only 7 states, Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, North Carolina, and Oregon, begin counting before election day. And here's a shout out. Florida's #1 begins counting 22 days before the election, earlier than other states. 4 states, Delaware, Montana, Nebraska, and Virginia, began counting a day or 2 ahead. Maryland does not start counting until the day after the election. So with the huge influx of mail-in votes expected, delaying the start of counting will delay results. Now, counting mail-in votes is very time-consuming. It takes 4 people, and nothing demonstrates the problems better than the recent New York primary. In the 2020 primary, 50% of the votes were mail-in compared to 2 to 3% in previous elections. And here is what the New York Board of Elections had to say, quote, "The astronomically high number of absentee ballots overwhelmed the system built to handle far, far fewer. The system is built to process 3 to 5%, not 40 to 60%. It's not possible to change the process overnight." Most of you, this is a business audience, most of you are in business. It's like saying, I'm going to go from having 2 stores to having 200 stores in 1 day. Can't do it. Now, it took 6 weeks to count primary ballots in several New York congressional elections. If anybody watched the debate between Biden and Trump, Trump referred to the Carolyn Maloney election. And in this particular congressional election, took 6 weeks, and they still didn't have the results. Now, in the final election, turnout is 6 times the primary. So if it takes 6 weeks to count a primary and you have 6 times the turnout in the final election, that's 36 weeks. And the current officials have to resign on January 3rd, leaving seats vacant. So as the Wall Street Journal wrote, everyone should examine New York's voting mess and then take action. Otherwise, Americans might spend Christmas wondering which self-proclaimed president-elect will prevail in court. Now, the second problem, besides the time it takes to count, is rejected votes. In Queens, New York, 25% of all mail-in votes were rejected. In the 12th district of Brooklyn, it was 28%. Hey, if 25% of all ballots are rejected, there's something wrong. Now, why were ballots rejected? First was signatures. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have no clue to how I signed my name when I first registered. If I filled out a mail-in ballot, I have no clue to whether it's the same signature I used, 50, 60 years ago when I first registered. Envelopes sealed with tape instead of saliva or not sealed. If you put a little piece of Scotch tape on your envelope, your ballot is rejected. In Georgia, they got new machines, and tens of thousands of ballots were rejected because people did not completely fill out all the X's. And I've already talked about missing postmarks. So with a 25% rejection rate and a 50% mail-in rate, stands to reason any candidate that loses an election by 20% or less will challenge that election in court, and that could take 8 months to a year. Look, here's a couple of examples of challenged elections. In 1984, in Indiana, a congressional seat sat open for 4 months over 92 absentee ballots. 92 ballots took them 4 months to count. In 2008, the Senate seat between Al Franken and Norm Coleman sat open for 8 months over 6,655 ballots. And in 2018, a North Carolina seat sat open for 9 months because of what was called ballot harvesting. And in these races, there were very few mail-in votes. However, if every race that came within 20 or 25% were challenged, each challenge could take 8 months to a year. And if there were a lot of challenge, the courts could be clogged, meaning the challenges could take a lot longer. Now, some states are going to have real problems with mail-in votes. The states that did very few mail-ins in the past, you're talking asking a state to go from 4% or 6% up to 50% or 60%. We already know what happened in Georgia. Their primaries were a disaster, as were Wisconsin. Connecticut has no early voting, and a couple of these other states could be swing states or have competitive races. Now, these are some of the better states. You want to look at states that really have problems. Here's one of my favorite numbers. In 13 states and the District of Columbia, with 31.1 million votes in 2018, had fewer mail-ins than Utah by itself with 1.1 million votes. So gearing up, going from 1.9%, how does Kentucky go from 1.5% to 50% overnight? How does New York go from 3% to 50% overnight? The New York Board of Elections told you can't do it. So and further, in states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, have divided governments with one party controlling the governorship and the other the legislature. You've got a bunch of competitive Senate races. These states are going to have real problems. Now, Florida, as we said, Florida, which has lived through close elections in 2000 and 2018, is better prepared. First, in 2018, it ranked 9th in the percentage of mail-in votes with 30.9. So to go from 30.9 to 50 is not like going from 3 to 50. Florida also allows signature verification 22 days before the election, avoiding a key bottleneck. It has early voting 8 or 11 to 15 days before federal elections, which avoids election constraints. It starts early counting 22 days before the election, the earliest of any state. And it is ranked number 24 by the MIT Election Performance Index, which if you look at the other large states, California is number 50, New York 49, Texas 42, Illinois beats it at 21, Pennsylvania 37. And Florida registers above average in most measures, except mail-in ballots, unreturned or rejected, and military and overseas ballots unreturned and rejected. I might just say that, Florida, which I know cares about its military, should improve that area. But otherwise, Florida's in pretty good shape. And interestingly, as we study gerrymandering, Florida is also in pretty good shape. Everybody gerrymanders. But Florida's results are actually more Democratic than most states, especially the swing states. In Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, Democrats won the majority of the vote, but Republicans won the majority of the seats in the legislature. In Wisconsin, Democrats won by 8.5%. That's like 52.5 to 44. But Republicans won almost 2/3 of the seats. The same pattern happened in Congress. The Democrats won by a huge margin in Congress and got a minority of the seats. Same sort of situation applied in North Carolina and in Pennsylvania and Michigan. But in Florida, in Congress, the Republicans won by 5%, despite 5 Democratic candidates running unopposed, but the seats were split 14-13. And in Senate elections, Republicans won by 8.5%, got 14 of 20 seats. In the House elections, they won by 14% and won 73 seats compared to 47. So Florida gets pretty good grades on this stuff. Okay, so how do we avoid a constitutional crisis? Just real simple. Provide local and convenient and secure drop boxes where voters can deposit their ballots. Provide extra funding for the USPS. Process mail-in votes when they're received. Inform people if their votes have been rejected. Allow more early voting. Allow early counting of ballots. Hire poll workers. Contact appropriate government officials and fix the loopholes. We talked about drop boxes. Governments may not have money to purchase new voting machines, but they certainly have time to put boxes in post offices, police and fire stations, just to let people drop off their ballots so they don't have to worry about the mail. Doesn't take much to give the USPS a few more bucks during the election season. As we said, ballots should be processed when they're received. This is going to cost a little bit, but it's given the potential risk, the costs are very small. Here's an important issue, which is inform voters if their votes have been rejected. You can imagine the 28% of the voters in Brooklyn or 25% of the voters in Queens think they exercised their right to vote, but they didn't because there was a piece of Scotch tape or something wrong. So informing voters so they can correct their mistakes, failing to inform voters so they can correct their mistakes results in much higher rejection rates. Higher rejection rates result in more challenged elections, which are going to create lawsuits and problems. So the extra cost of being able to inform voters is going to save a lot of aggravation. Increasing early in-person voting. I talked about this before. Most poll workers are over 60. People are concerned about COVID. People are concerned about mail-in votes, as our poll showed. And the easy solution is to provide increased in-person voting at selected polling places, which allows people to social distance and cast votes without concerns for long lines. As I say, some states like Connecticut don't allow early in-person voting, and some states have very limited places. We think all states should offer 3 weeks of early in-person voting. We talked about counting of ballots. We think ballots should be counted when they arrive. People talk about, the results are going to be released. Look, Florida allows 22 days of counting. The counting can start 22 days before the election. There are 9 states that have early counting, and I've never seen the early counting results released to the press. So it's the states that allow early counting have had no problem with this, and other states should follow their lead. Hire more poll workers, especially in this time of high unemployment. There are plenty of people available. And contact relevant government officials. In every state, there are 2 people responsible for running elections. In most states, the Secretary of State conducts elections. A complete listing of who in each state is provided on the website of the National Conference of State Legislatures. And most state legislatures have committees in their state Senate and Assembly designed to oversee and set election rules. So we should urge these people to make whatever changes they can so we can avoid a constitutional crisis. And finally, before the next election, we should fix the loopholes in the law so that, you know, we don't have a problem with a candidate dying or you don't have enough people in Congress or the Electoral College can't vote. This is not, you know, that we should have a better system than we have. Okay, before concluding, I'd like to just return to the election to tell you what to look for on election night, because I didn't want to waste your time telling you about all these problems without telling you how to scope out the election. So when I was an analyst on Wall Street, I issued reports on what to look for when news was reported. So as I said, what should investors look for on election night? Well, on election night and for the next few days, everyone will be inundated with information. Fox News is going to predict that Trump won by a landslide. MSNBC is going to predict that Biden won by a landslide. One of them's probably going to be wrong. And many states can be predicted now because they're strongly partisan. I'm going to stick my nose out and my neck out and say Massachusetts and Rhode Island are going to vote for Trump. Mississippi and Alabama are going to vote for Biden. Mississippi and Alabama are going to vote for Trump. But anyone trying to guess the ultimate results should focus on 3 states: Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina. Why are these 3 states so important? Well, it's because all of you are in Florida and I want to be nice to you. No, that's not the reason. The reason is this. First, they're swing states. So are other states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But these 3 states start counting early. Florida starts counting 22 days before the election. Arizona and North Carolina start 14 days before the election. And these 3 states don't offer extended time for receiving ballots. In Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina, ballots aren't in by election day. Too bad. So this means that Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina will have complete or almost complete tallies weeks before other states, a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks before other states. So right now the election's split. Looks like Trump has 104 solid electoral votes, Biden has 106. Trump has 60 lean, Biden has 120 lean, 141 toss-up. This means the election is going to be decided by the toss-up states. Now, states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and others, they're allowing extra time for ballots to arrive. States like Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and others don't start counting before election day. These states are going to have garbage on election night. Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, they're going to be the canaries in the coal mine. If these states lean strongly for Biden, the election's over. These states lean strongly for Trump, he should win. If these states are very close, there could be a long election. On election night, ignore the noise and focus on results from Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina. So I thank you for listening to all this. As we said, the 2020 election is one of the most critical in our history. In addition to the presidency and the control of Congress and states, the election will also provide the basis for drawing the new political districts for the next decade because it's a census year. We are very polarized and in the middle of a health crisis, and many leaders on both sides are concerned about a fraudulent election, which we can't afford a fraudulent election or a constitutional crisis. As we noted, there's simple steps we can take to make mail-in voting function better and avoid election results that may be disputed for years to come. And we hope that political leaders recognize these issues, allocate needed funds, and take steps to avoid a potential crisis. We have a responsibility as citizens to influence our leaders to take necessary actions to preserve the integrity of our democracy. And I thank you all for coming and attending, and now we'll answer your questions.
Before we do that, Peter, we're just going to take a quick re-poll of the first
Yes.
question that we asked.
Okay.
So we asked you to tell you what the concerns were. Now, having listened to Peter's presentation, we want to see if you've changed your mind. So we're going to put up a quick poll here for about 30 seconds. And while that is happening, I also just want to mention that we're probably going to go a little bit after the top of the hour, probably 5 or 10 minutes after the top of the hour. So those of you who want to stay on, if you have a moment to stay, you know, I think we have plenty of questions. So I just want to make sure we try to get to as many of them. Thank you, Peter, Mike, and Herb for allowing us the opportunity to listen to this great presentation. I'll close the poll and we'll show the results. So I think you've got a pretty conclusive answer there, right?
Yep.
All right, so let's go ahead, Peter, and stop sharing your screen, and then we'll bring back Herb, and we'll start in the Q&A.
Very good. So thank you, Angel, and thank you, Peter, for that wonderful, scary presentation. If you have any questions or comments, go to the chat box and enter it, and I'll be looking at the chat box and selecting the questions. In some cases, I'll be combining similar questions to ask Peter. I'm going to start with the first question, Peter. You mentioned 9 things that can be done. Now, we're getting closer and closer to Election Day, so 2 questions. First, of those 9, Peter, what seems to be, what are most practical for people in Florida if they would like to do things to avoid some of the scenarios that you mentioned, and then more broadly around the country, what can be done with just 4 weeks before the election to help the situation this year, as opposed to doing things that might help for future elections?
Well, I think the things in some places you're running out of time. And as I say, Florida, I think, has done most of the right things. The things that states can still change the early voting. What states have done in response to the problem is they've extended the delivery dates. What they should have done is extend the early voting. And I think the best solution right now is to extend in-person early voting.
Thank you. I'm looking at the chat box, and I see a lot of comments about people sort of agreeing with the scary scenarios and saying maybe I should be jumping out the window or doing other things like that. But I'm looking for some questions that some of you may have.
I've got one here for Peter. So Margaret McGrath asked, in terms of Florida Amendment 3, due to the top 2 general primary for state officers, some have concluded that the approval will cause fewer minority legislators to be elected with the redistricting rules. Have you investigated that?
Yeah. I can only go by the experience of the same system in the states where it's used, which is California, Washington, Nebraska for state legislature, and Louisiana. And what has been found, and I'm going to ignore Washington State because it doesn't have, California's a better example because it has more minorities. The biggest thing that I have found in studying the results of the nonpartisan primaries is that it elects more moderates. That when, for example, our current Democratic vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, ran for the Senate in a Democratic state, She ran in the final election against Congresswoman Sanchez. They were both Democrats. And Harris was the moderate, and she received something like 88% of the Republican vote and 86% of the independent vote, and lost a majority of the Democratic vote. It doesn't seem to work against minorities. It seems to work against people on the far left or the far right. The one thing that's interesting in Florida is that in some of the more polarizing districts, as I say, in I forget what it was, five congressional districts in Florida, the Democrat ran unopposed. In those districts, there would be two candidates, and the winning candidate would likely be the one that could reach across to Republicans and independents.
Peter, someone raised the issue that the Constitution says that the president's term ends on January 20th. So how could Trump then remain in office if the election is still unsettled? And I think you said that it could be by the emergency.
Well, look, there are two things called the Emergency Powers Act and the Insurrection Act of whatever, 1807, I think. Excuse me, I sometimes forget the exact years of these acts. But if there was a state of war, if Trump said, or I'm not singling out Trump, but if a president said, look, Russia's invaded the Baltics, Turkey invaded Cyprus, China's blockading Taiwan, there are riots on the streets of every city. I am going to stay as president under these acts until the emergency is resolved. I'm not telling you that Supreme Court would uphold that, but that is you've seen that in other countries and other democracies as a reason for somebody to try to stay in power a little longer.
Someone else has asked Peter, what is the real reason for states not having more early voting? What are the real reasons for that?
Oh, that's real simple. In state, and that's where we started. Why, I'll ask a different question. Why do states have a rule that says elections are paid for by taxpayers? Each person here who lives in Florida, New York, wherever you live, you pay your fair share of elections. In New York and Florida in particular, those two states, the parties set the rules of who can vote in a primary election. So if you live in Florida and you're an independent, or if I live in New York and I'm an independent, I can't vote in the primary, but I pay for the primary. The reason that states don't want early voting is real simple. If you have just voting on election day and you make the rules harder for people to vote, it gives the parties more control.
That goes back to Porter's analysis on the forces, or the five forces analysis on the election system. So
absolutely, and I might just add, new entrants come into industries. This is back to Porter. And change the industry. Ford revolutionizes the horse and buggy industry. Amazon changes the shopping industry. The last new entrant in the politics industry was the Republican Party in 1854. And so these two parties have set rules in a way that benefit them.
Right. Marcus Wegner asks, why haven't states really anticipated and responded to the possible deluge of mail-in ballots? What's keeping them, or what's kept them so far from really getting ahead of this issue?
Two reasons. The first, I would say, complacency and stupidity. Whether you are a Democrat or Republican, when Donald Trump started to talk about fraud in mail-in ballots, he was sending a signal to people that this was going to be an issue he was going to fight on. And what did the Democrats do? The Democrats start sending everybody emails saying, vote by mail, rather than the two parties saying, hey, we could have a problem. Look at what happened in the Wisconsin primary. Look at what happened in the Georgia primary. Look at what happened in the New York primary. But these two parties are so polarized that rather than try to figure out how to solve the problem, it's vote by mail or mail-ins are fraud. And I'm not taking either side of that equation.
Are you concerned about poll watchers and intimidation potentially? Some of the things that happened earlier this week, I guess.
I think that I'm not overly concerned. I don't think there's any way to avoid that kind of situation. And there will be individual situations where somebody says they're intimidated by a poll watcher. And in this polarized society that we have, both sides are going to be out there scratching and clawing.
By the way, that intimidation point is perhaps more closely allied to a prior presentation we made on the census, where undoubtedly there are people who have either become citizens recently or are not citizens who are intimidated in terms of filling out the census. You can see what our analysis yielded on that if you go to our website.
And incidentally, since you're all business school graduates, except poor John Sundberg, who's a lawyer, and somebody else who said they were a lawyer, I'll give you my favorite return on investment number. We have calculated that each incremental person who signs up for the census, that the city, let's say the city of Miami, will get an additional $91,000 for each incremental person signing the census.
Over 10 years.
Over a 10-year period. So the question is why businesses in these cities didn't get together and say, look, hey, we could hire somebody, pay him $10,000 for a month. And if they could sign up, 200 people in a month, what's the return on investment? Pretty good return on investment, but nobody thought of that.
I have one other question of a possible, to add to the 9 that you mentioned, Peter. It's been said that the networks could provide a service by not declaring winners. I don't know if it's the networks or the states on election night when there'll still be millions of votes to be counted. What do you say about that?
Yeah, but I say absolutely. I mean, if you don't want to see the example I gave you before, where I said Fox is going to declare Trump the winner and MSNBC is going to declare Biden the winner. Having said that, what we've looked at, and I don't know how many other people are focusing on this, is very simple question. When are ballots? 3 things. What experience does each state have in counting ballots? When are ballots counted? When are ballots processed? And, that's why, we've come up with this idea of Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida as the canaries in the coal mine. We're not, I don't care what they tell me about Wisconsin or Michigan.
Well, that's true for having an indication on election night, but longer term, if we get into this question of the delays in the counting, the other states certainly weigh in.
No. Well, look, it's also clear from looking at the polling when they ask Republicans, are you going to vote by mail or in person? Republicans say they're going to vote in person. When you ask Democrats, Democrats say they're going to vote by mail. So everybody should recognize, and hopefully by now the networks are figuring it out, that the first day Trump is going to be well in the lead no matter what happens. When I first wrote this, Michael objected to it and said, oh, that's partisan. It's not partisan. I guarantee everybody that the first night Trump is in the lead because they're going to be counting in-person votes.
I see one more question. We're getting toward the very end. And what popular vote margin would ensure that results will be clear on election day or shortly thereafter? But you know, on election night, we haven't counted all the millions and millions of votes, and so I don't know how you can say what the popular vote is on that.
The answer is there is no number, and the reason is very simple, because you don't know what votes have been counted on election day. You know, you will know you can start out by ignoring Mississippi and New York and a bunch of other states, but you aren't going to know. That's why the first slide showed Trump declaring victory. I have a very high degree of confidence that Trump is ahead on election night because they're going to be counting. Just remember, with a mail-in vote, even if it's there a week or two ahead of time, they've got to open it up, they've got to process it, then they got to shove it in, they've got to put it in a book and then shove it in the machine. The mail-in votes get counted later. And if you look at any election that's happened this year, what you see is the in-person votes got counted first, then the mail-in votes. So on election night, don't expect to see anything.
Peter, I think we have time for just a couple more to answer. I'm going to give you a couple of rapid fire ones, and then I think I want to just one bigger one that hopefully you can take a crack at. And I would also ask if you can.
One question that Gene put: do drop boxes put a postmark on the envelope? Drop boxes do not put a postmark on the envelope, but they're cleared out every day or every other day. So it's no problem.
Peter, one request to you guys. I'm going to try to see if I can get all these questions that haven't been answered, and if you can answer them, we'll send answers out to the people who requested them, if you don't mind. But somebody's asking, if they requested a mail-in ballot, can they change their mind and vote in person? Do they surrender their unopened mail-in ballot as proof that they didn't vote twice?
Each state has different rules, but you should be able, because a lot of mail-in ballots are lost, you should be able to vote in person. What happens when you have a mail-in ballot, you send it in, they mark you off on. The reason Trump's telling people to vote twice is he's hoping that in some places they won't mark you off when the mail-in came in and you get away with voting twice. But you should have no trouble voting in person if you haven't voted by mail.
Right, and if you send in your ballot like I do, and typically you can go online and check to see whether your ballot's been received and processed.
In Florida, not in most states.
In Florida, yes. Well, our audience obviously being.
No, I understand. I'm just pointing out. Florida is actually, as I said, Florida is ahead of the curve on most of these things.
So someone's asked hopefully maybe not too controversial question here, but under the black swan scenario, what is the possibility or probability of the U.S. turning into an authoritarian country?
Well,
what's your response?
My response is twofold. First, we gave a presentation last night asking what was going to happen to the stock market under a black swan scenario. I thought that was the question you were going to ask. Can we see Dow 10,000 again? I think that this country is way too strong to turn into an authoritarian country. I have great confidence in this country.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you and the entire team from Reform Elections Now for me, and I'm sure for the people on the call. This has been quite a stimulating conversation. We will be sending out copies of your presentation to the attendees. So if you want to take a look at this, it'll be available to you later on. The recording will also be available in case you want to share it with some of your friends. So on behalf of us at the Harvard Business School Club of South Florida, I truly want to thank you so much. And hopefully some of your predictions won't come true, and some of them may. But as you said, hopefully we're strong enough as a country to continue to weather some of these looming problems that we're going to have potentially over the next couple of months. Florida started sending out their ballots last week in some counties, and I know that in most of South Florida, I believe the ballots will be going out sometime either today or tomorrow, I believe. So on behalf of the entire board of directors of the HBS Club of South Florida, we want to thank you all for participating. Again, thank you to the team at Reform Election, and thanks especially to Herb, to Mike, and to Peter for a fabulous presentation. Please contact us. You'll be getting a survey as well. Email us, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, whatever your social media venue that you prefer. And with that, we will wish you all a great evening. And remember to go out and vote. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Herb has his word.
Could I just make a comment? Reform Elections now, we don't go out of business after the election. We are dealing with issues, long-term issues that involve primaries, gerrymandering, and many, many other campaign financing, many other issues. And if you are interested in this general subject, beyond what's happening with this election, go to our website and you can subscribe to receive information. We don't ask for money. We don't deluge you, but you'll stay informed with what we're paying attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb.
Well, thanks for making this possible for us as well. Because I
You're
do think
welcome.
education and advocacy are all part of what makes the world work better.
Well, thank you for bringing this to us, and good luck with your ongoing efforts.
Thank
Thank
Have
you.
a great evening, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Stay well.